Good morning, everyone. My name is Alan Lusk, and I am a former board member at Hagerman. I just rolled off this past year's board, but I'm going to host the meeting today and turn it over to Susan to introduce our speaker for today.
Thank you. I am very pleased to introduce a professor of biology at Austin College, Dr. Steve Goldsmith. He came to Austin College with a PhD in behavioral ecology and genetics in 1993. He has done research on the ecological role of the larval longhorn beetle in the Hawaiian forest. He'll be talking today about plants and animals in the four main islands of Hawaii. Dr. Goldsmith, welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and get us started. See if I can do this properly. All right, can everybody see now a double rainbow over Hilo Bay?
Yes. Did you check the boxes to share video and sound?
I think I must have.
But we can move forward.
Everybody can see this. I've got several of these title slides because I want to provide a little background information to give you some context for why a biologist from Texas would study the natural history of the Hawaiian Islands. My first trip to Hawaii was in August of 1995 for an international animal behavior conference. My wife, Becky Goldsmith, who is not a biologist but a professional quilter, was not about to let me go to Hawaii alone. So she accompanied me and spent most of a week touring museums and art galleries in Honolulu. So she knows that city much better than I do. On the airplane ride home, Becky said, Hawaii is a wonderful, wonderful place. We need to figure out a way to go back there. Why don't you teach a January term course in Hawaii? And so I began exploring, reading books and pamphlets and exploring what little information was available on the internet at the time, and eventually developed an itinerary and a syllabus for the course I called Natural History of the Hawaiian Islands. I taught the course 5 times, 4 with Becky and once with a colleague here at Austin College, Keith Kissel, 1999, 2002, 2004, 2006, and 2016. And so in addition to the teaching of the course, I also conducted research at a place we'll talk about in a few minutes. This talk is structured more or less like the course was structured, although I'm including some additional information about places that we've gone that we didn't take the students, so as to give you some information about what places you might want to go on your own biology excursion to the Hawaiian Islands. Hawaii is an island chain of 8 major islands and then a large number of smaller islands. The 8 major islands being obviously Hawaii, the big island, Maui, Molokai, Lanai, Ka'ahulave, Oahu, and Kauai, with Ni'ihau being a privately held island. Each of the islands is different from the others in a variety of ways, but there are a lot of similarities as well. And so during the course, the students would often see the same things, plants and animals, in different ecological contexts, and so with different characteristics. We started the course off on the big island of Hawaii, and there's basically two main sides. There's the Hilo side on the east and north, and the Kona side on the west. The big island, Maui and Kauai, are all tall enough that they have a windward side and a leeward side, where the windward side is exposed to the trade winds. And so there's a wet side of the island and a dry side of the island. On the big island, the Hilo side is the wet side, the Kona side is the dry side. And we would start off in Hilo. Here's an image of Hilo, Hawaii. a small community about the size of Sherman, Texas, but much more attractive and pleasant than Sherman, Texas is. We start off on the Hilo side because of access to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park and other biologically interesting places. But it also turns out that Hilo is a fairly sleepy little community, so there's not a lot of bars and clubs, and so the students get the idea that the courses actually work and not a month-long party, because it's not a month-long party. And so it turns out that Hilo is a good place to start them. So we would usually spend the first few days in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. This is the visitor center. There's the Crater Rim Drive, which goes around the crater of Kilauea. I've got an image of that in just a moment. Across Crater Rim Drive from the visitor center is Volcano House Hotel. If you walk out the backside of the Volcano House Hotel, this is the view you have of Kilauea crater, with the main part of Kilauea in the foreground, and then what's called the fire pit, Halema'uma'u, is the circular crater, pit crater in the background. It doesn't look like this anymore for reasons that we're going to talk about directly. So we would start off hiking part of the Crater Rim Loop Trail. There's a trail that goes all the way around the crater as well. This is me with the 2006 group. We're talking about plants and animals that we would see on the wet side of the island, where there is native rainforest, with the rainforest being primarily two plant species, two canopy tree species. One of them is called Ohia lehua. Ohia lehua's scientific name is Metrosideros polymorpha, the polymorpha part meaning variable in body shape and growth form. It's a colonizing species on bare lava flows, as shown here. It's got these bright red or crimson bottle brush flowers. Another colonizing plant of the bare lava flows is called Ohelo. Ohelo is a blueberry relative, and so the berries are actually very tasty. I usually let my students eat a few of the berries when we encounter Ohelo, but we leave most of them for the nene, which is the Hawaiian goose. Another colonizing species is an Ama'u fern, and the name for the fire pit, Halema'uma'u, means house of the Ama'u fern. And so the floor of Kilauea crater would have a lot of Ama'u ferns in addition to Ohia lehua and Ohelo as colonizing species. Another fern that's common in many places in Hawaii is called uluhe. This is a new frond of uluhe ferns, and uluhe grows prolifically up to a foot long of the fronds each day. And so in Hawaii, they say uluhe happens. Another fern of the forest is called hapu'u pulu. Hapu'u is a tree fern, and so it is a prominent component of the understory in Ohia lehua rainforests. Here's another view from 2016 of the fire pit, Halema'uma'u, and you can see here it has begun at that point a steam eruption. And so part of the Crater Rim Loop Trail got closed because the steam contains sulfur dioxide, which combines with water in the air or in your lungs to form sulfuric acid. And sulfuric acid is particularly corrosive. And so you don't want to be hiking downwind from the fire pit when it's doing the steam eruption. The fire pit now looks like this. This is after the 2018 eruption. Some of you may be familiar, in 2018, the volcano Kilauea began an eruption that was on the East Rift Zone in a community called Leilani Estates. And during that eruption, the eruption destroyed about 700 structures and homes, but it also added 875 acres of new land to the Big Island of Hawaii. And so we would take the students to see the fire pit because in addition to the eruption, you can pretty much always see a bird called the white-tailed tropic bird, which forages down by the ocean. Kilauea crater is about 20 miles from the ocean, but they fly downhill out to the ocean to forage, and then they come uphill into the craters to roost and nest. Here's the 2006 group. We took them hiking out to the fire pit, and you can see the sign there that says, "Caution, thin crust area, stay on trail." The thin crust is not that you would break through and your feet go into molten lava, but there are what are called skylights. This is an image of a skylight where there was molten lava underneath, it solidified on top, and then the lava receded, and it creates this opening where if you break through, the lava will tear your legs up as you fall through into the skylight. Here's a short video of the eruption that was happening. We were there most recently in January and February of this year. And so here's the eruption going on. You can see the steam plume coming up. And if you look right down in the middle here, there's puddles of pohoi and lava bubbling up. So the eruption is still going on. Before the 2018 eruption, the fire pit was about 300 yards wide and about 300 feet deep. And it basically quadrupled in size after the eruption, both in terms of depth and in terms of size, covering the floor of Kilauea crater. There's a side crater called Kilauea Iki, and I should point out, Kilauea means much spewing and burning. Kilauea Iki means small Kilauea, and so this is a side crater, and you can actually hike down into and across Kilauea Iki. The hill in the middle ground there, Pu'upua'i, was a result of a 1959 eruption that filled Kilauea Iki with lava, which eventually then solidified, but also spewed a bunch of cinders out that formed Pu'upua'i and also covered up a bunch of the rainforest. It's now what's called the devastation area of Kilauea crater. We took the students hiking on what was at the time the newest land on the planet. It is a dangerous place to go, and so the National Park Service has a variety of both signage and videos to show you what to do and to stay away from. The bench area, which can fall off into the ocean, and people get trapped and caught. And so you have to really be very careful hiking out on the fresh lava. So as Susan said, I'm a behavioral ecologist by training. I want to give you a little bit more backstory. I'm a behavioral ecologist by training. Earlier in my career, I studied the reproductive behavior and what we call mating systems. And my study organism of choice was an insect group called the longhorn beetles. I figured this would be my only opportunity to show you pictures of copulating insects, so I should take advantage of it. I learned during my preparations for the natural history course that Hawaii is home to about 140 endemic species of longhorn beetles. Each island has got its own set of insects, its own set of beetles, and each beetle is found only on one island. And so I was eligible for a sabbatical in the fall of 2000. And I thought, who better than me to go to Hawaii and study their longhorn beetles, given my years of experience studying longhorn beetles on the mainland. And so I spent 6 weeks in Hawaii during the fall of 2000. And through an instance of great good luck, I located a national wildlife refuge on the Big Island on the windward slope of Mauna Kea called Hakala Forest National Wildlife Refuge. Hakala Forest is here in sort of the middle elevations of Mauna Kea. And Hakala Forest is called that because it is a remnant of native Hawaiian rainforest. To get to Hockalaa Forest National Wildlife Refuge from Hilo is a pretty serious kind of proposition. So you first start out on what's called Wainuinui Avenue. I just enjoy saying Wainuinui Avenue. Wainuinui means really, really big water. Wainuinui Avenue merges with the saddle road that goes between the summit of Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea. Mauna Loa being the long mountain, Mauna Kea being the white mountain. And eventually you turn off the paved road on what's called the Keanakolu Highway. This is a four-wheel drive only road that skirts around the windward slope of Mauna Kea. And so it takes a total of 2 hours to get from Hilo to the Hockalaa tract of the Hockalaa Forest National Wildlife Refuge, which is where I did most of my research, which again, as Susan said, was on the distribution and abundance of longhorn beetle larvae in the forests at Hockalaa Forest National Wildlife Refuge. It is a remnant of what's called montane wet forest. The refuge totals about 51 square miles, and so there's a significant tract of native rainforest here. There are two main canopy trees. There's Ohia lehua, which I have to tell you the story of Ohia and lehua at this point, because Ohia is a big canopy tree. It's not the most important canopy tree, but it's the most numerous canopy tree. So in Hawaiian legend, Ohia was a prince, tall, strong, and handsome, and lehua was a beautiful princess. And they were, of course, very much in love. One day, Pele, the goddess of the volcanoes, touring through her realm, came to the village of Ohia and lehua. And when she saw Ohia, she became immediately enamored. But Ohia was faithful to lehua and so rejected Pele's advances. Bad idea. In her wrath at being rejected, Pele turned Ohia into a tree, a tall, strong, and handsome tree, but a tree just the same. Lehua was heartbroken and begged Pele to let the lovers be together. In her jealousy at their love, Pele turned lehua into a beautiful flower and placed her on the branches of the Ohia tree, reuniting the lovers. So now when you pluck a lehua flower from an Ohia tree, it will rain, which means the gods are crying because you've separated the faithful lovers. Pardon me. The other and more important, culturally and botanically more important canopy tree of Hawaiian montane forest is the koa tree. Koa is a member of the legume family, but historically there were koa trees that were large enough that native Hawaiians would be able to carve from a single trunk of a koa tree, a 50-foot long sailing canoe. And so these are very large, and the wood is very hard and very durable. And I've got a piece of it around here somewhere. I don't see it right now. So koa and ohia are the two main canopy trees of Hawaiian montane forest. There are lots of understory plants as well. Olapa being a small tree, akala, a blackberry relative, is another one of those, and the blackberry, the akala fruits are very flavorful. One of the reasons to go to Hockalaa Forest National Wildlife Refuge is for the birds. The refuge biologist that I worked with, his name is Jack Jeffrey. He's an accomplished biologist, but he's also an accomplished bird photographer. And so there are at Hockalaa Forest, there are three main forest birds in the honey creeper group: amakihi, apapane, and Iivi. And so these are the three most common bird species that you find at Hockalaa Forest National Wildlife Refuge. They've reintroduced nene as well. This is the Hawaiian goose, and they do mongoose control. They trap the mongooses, and so nene are successfully breeding. They're a ground nesting bird, and so the mongooses, if they're present, will feed on the eggs and the nestlings. But the nene are successfully breeding at Hockalaa Forest National Wildlife Refuge. There are a couple of other endangered species that are also found at Hockley Forest National Wildlife Refuge and other forested areas on the Big Island of Hawaii. One of those is called a kepa. A kepa is this cute little orange, bright orange bird. And then another one is called Akiapola owl. This is the one that's the ecological equivalent of a woodpecker. And so it's got the very long, curved upper beak that it uses to fish longhorn beetle larvae, which is where my research came in. Longhorn beetle larvae out of the dead sticks of koa trees. And they use the short chisel-like lower beak to chisel into the koa branches to find the longhorn beetle larvae. And so my research was basically the link through the beetles from the koa trees to this endangered bird species. The Hockley Forest National Wildlife Refuge was actually originally designated a national wildlife refuge to try to preserve some of these endangered bird species. And apparently the refuge efforts to reforest the areas of the refuge are having the desired effect of providing foraging habitat for Akiapola owl and the other forest birds. When we're at Hockley Forest National Wildlife Refuge, we're already halfway up Mauna Kea. And so we decide to take the students all the way up to the summit of Mauna Kea, where there's a set of observatories that actually is snow and ice at the summit of Mauna Kea, in spite of the fact that it's a tropical location. At 13,796 feet, you get snow and ice in the wintertime. One of the other reasons for going up Mauna Kea is to see the Mauna Kea silver sword. We're going to talk more about silver swords in a few minutes, but the silver sword is an endemic plant group. There's a whole, it's called the Silver Sword Alliance. There are three main kinds of plants in the Silver Sword Alliance, but the Silver Sword Alliance, they're in the sunflower family, and you can tell that most readily when the plant is in flower. This is a Mauna Kea silver sword. A more accessible area of Hawaiian montane forest is on the Pu'u'o'o Trail. The Pu'u'o'o Trail is accessible from the Saddle Road, which again goes between the summit of Mauna Kea and the summit of Mauna Loa. And the Pu'u'o'o Trail winds in and out between what are called kipuka. Kipuka is a word that means an island of forest that's surrounded by lava flows. And so the kipuka include Koa and Ohia. There's Mauna Kea in the distance, and this is some of the A'a lava. A'a is a jagged, what they refer to as clinkery kind of lava, and it's a dangerous one to walk on. But in addition to Koa and Ohia, there's a native shrub called A'ali'i, and there's another native shrub called Puki'ave. And we'll see Puki'ave and A'ali'i again as we progress through our tour of the islands. The Pu'u'o'o Trail is also a good place to see Apapane, Amakihi, I'iwi, and occasionally Akiapola owl. So after several days of hiking in the forest and going up into the mountains, we have to take the students to the beach because they get really restless if they don't get to go to the beach in Hawaii. But even a trip to the beach on a course in natural history of the Hawaiian Islands is a lesson in natural history. And so this is the black sand beach at a place called Punalu'u. And we take the students there for the snorkeling, but also to see the green sea turtle, which the Hawaiians call honu. When we were at this place in 2016 with the students, there were 8 turtles in the same place at the same time. I'd never seen so many at the same, and they come out onto the shore to bask. And I'm trying to count if there's actually 8 of them there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 turtles all in the same place at the same time. Punalu'u is a good place for snorkeling because there's a lot of fish diversity, but it's not an easy place to snorkel because to get into the water, it's basically the sand ends at the edge of the beach And then you've got cobblestones that you have to walk over. So I go down to the edge of the beach, put on my mask and fins and snorkel. And then when a big wave comes in, launch myself out above the cobblestones and swim out into the deeper water. But there's a lot of both fish diversity and marine invertebrate diversity. This is what's called the slate pencil sea urchin, which the Hawaiians call hauki uki ula ula. The gold rim surgeonfish is a common one here. There are schools of convict tang and white bar tang, yellow tang, and one that's called the Moorish idol. This is one of the reasons we go to Punaluu, is because the Moorish idol is a fairly common species there that's not readily found in other places. After about a week of, well, several days on the Hilo side of the Big Island, we take a trip around the north side of the island through the community of Waimea. This is the Queen Liliuokalani Garden in Hilo, where there are a variety of exotic plant species. This is a Japanese garden. Students get to see ironwood, which is an exotic species that was imported from Australia. Coconut palms are common in Hawaii. This is one that was brought to Hawaii by the Polynesian sailors who colonized Hawaii about 1,500 years ago. We get to go see the Waipio Valley. We don't hike down into Waipio Valley because there's no native plants there anymore. It's all exotics. And there aren't any native Hawaiians in Waipio Valley anymore because in the 1940s, a tsunami wiped out the communities that were there. And so the Hawaiians haven't recolonized. From the Kona side of the Big Island, we take the students to a variety of places, one of those being a National Historic Park called Pu'uhonua. It is a National Historic Park because it's what's called a city of refuge. And in Hawaiian tradition, if one of the commoners did something that was offensive to the royalty, the ali'i, the potential punishment was death. And so if you could get to a city of refuge, and you could then do atonement and not be put to death for offending the royalty. So it is a historic site. There are the carvings called tiki. This is a canoe shed, a canoe building shed. The tiki are there. And there's some additional exotic or indigenous plants, hala being an important indigenous plant, kiave being a relative of mesquite, which is one that you have to watch out for if you're going barefoot on the beach, because like mesquite in this country, they have thorns on the branches, and the thorns are stout enough that they will pierce your shoes or your skin. But one of the important reasons for taking students to Pu'uhonua is snorkeling in Honaunau Bay. This is another place where the fish diversity is really great. There are a variety of wrasse species, the wrasses being a particular family of fishes. This is the Christmas wrasse. That's the bird wrasse, called that for a reason. Saddle wrasse. This is the elegant chorus. And then the triggerfish. This is the Picasso triggerfish and the lagoon triggerfish. Both of them go by the Hawaiian name Humu Humu Nuku Nuku Apua'a, which means triggerfish with a snout like a pig. And then relatives of these fishes are the black durgan and the pink-tailed durgan. All of these are found commonly at Honaunau Bay, Pu'uhonua o Honaunau. Then there are the butterfly fish, the raccoon butterfly fish, the millet seed butterfly fish, and the ornate butterfly fish. But one of the important reasons for going to Honaunau Bay is because you can find both the common and the rare long-nosed butterfly fish. This is an image of the rare long-nosed butterfly fish. And within the rare long-nosed butterfly fish, you can see both the typical yellow form and the darker melanic form both in the same place. This is the one that the Hawaiians call La Wili Wili Nuku Nuku Oi Oi, which means fish that's shaped like a leaf but has a really long snout. Also from the Kona side of the Big Island, we take the students to the place called Kale'i, which is the southernmost point of the Big Island, and so also the southernmost point of the United States. Hawaiian tradition says that the Polynesian sailors first made landfall on the Hawaiian Islands at Kale'i, the south point, which doesn't, to me, look like a very welcoming place to make landfall because it's got high surf and jagged rocks. But it may be that the Hawaiians just, you know, that's their traditional story and they're sticking to it. This is a place where we see the helmet sea urchin. They are in the splash zone. And they creep around across the surface of the rocks, feeding on algae. Pardon me. Another place that we take the students from the Kona side of the Big Island is the green sand beach, Mahana Beach. It really does look like this. The sand is green because it's crystals of a mineral called olivine. Olivine is called that for a reason. But it's about a 3-mile walk to get to this beach. At least it used to be. You can now rent space in the back of a 4-wheel drive pickup truck and have somebody drive you out there for a 20-minute drive rather than a 45-minute walk. Of course, after walking 45 minutes, the students want to get in the water. We don't let them go very far out because there are typically rip currents at Mahana Beach, and so we don't want the students to get sucked out into the ocean. Our second island is Maui, and we typically stay in the small community on the west side of West Maui called Lahaina. Lahaina is a historically important area because it's both a whaling town and the missionaries set up shop there as well. And so there's sort of historical conflicts between the whalers and the missionaries that's told in the buildings and other areas of Lahaina. But one of the things that we do on Maui is take the students up onto Mount Haleakala, which is the big volcano on East Maui. The summit is about 10,000 feet elevation. And there's obviously a visitor center at the summit area. Haleakala means house of the sun. And in Hawaiian tradition, this is where the god Maui, and the island is called that for a reason, Maui captured the sun and made her slow down so as to increase the length of the growing season. And so people go to the summit of Haleakala for sunrise. I've been there for sunrise. It's not that impressive. So we don't take the students up there for sunrise because that means leaving Lahaina at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the students don't want to do that. But there's a trail, and this is the longest and most strenuous of the trails we take the students on hiking during the January term course. And so you can see what's called the Sliding Sands Trail goes down into and eventually across and back out of Haleakala Crater. The rules at Haleakala National Park are that hiking groups can be no more than 12 individuals, and the groups have to be at least half an hour apart. In teaching the course, that caused us a problem because we typically had 22 students, and there were 2 of us, so that's 2 groups of 12. And so what we would typically do is divide the students up into a slow group and a fast group. And I would start off down the trail with the slow group, and Becky or Keith would come half an hour later with fast group, hiking down into the crater and eventually seeing native plants and animals. And this is the place where we go to see the Haleakala silver sword. The silver sword, again, and it's called ahina hina in the Hawaiian language. The Haleakala silver sword is in the sunflower family, and you can tell it's a sunflower when it flowers. You can see the sunflower-like blossoms on this particular individual, but it's ecologically equivalent to a yucca in that it's got this rosette of long, skinny, pubescent leaves. And then it sends up a flowering stalk after growing for 20 years or more as a rosette of leaves, sends up a flowering stalk, and then the entire plant dies after it flowers. So phenologically as well as morphologically equivalent to a yucca. There's another kind of plant in the Silver Sword Alliance called variously several different things, but mostly they're called naenae. And this is a more of a shrubby plant. When it flowers, you can also see that it's in the sunflower family. But there's a place in Haleakala that we get to where there's both Ahinahina and naenae at the same place. And there are always a few individuals that are hybrids between Ahinahina and naenae. And so when we get to the place where the hybrids are, the fast group has caught up with the slow group. So we're no longer separated by 30 minutes and we're no longer groups of 12. But at that point, we never see anybody else in the crater. There's no park rangers down there or anything like that. So we continue the hike on out of the crater as a big group. This is the 2016 group. And we usually stop. We're all the way down into the bottom of the crater at this point. There, and we begin to see more dry country plants. This is the big shrub in the background is a mamane bush. And this is the first bush of any size that we've seen for a few hours. And so we typically alter its water and electrolyte balance in significant ways when we get to this particular shrub. As we hike on across, we are skirting around the flanks of some of the cinder cones, which are often littered with what are called pyroclastic bombs. Becky really enjoys the pyroclastic bombs, I think mostly because she gets to say pyroclastic bomb. Also, we show them various kinds of native plants. This is Pukiave again. And so the students often see things that they've seen before, but again, in different ecological or environmental contexts. There's another montane plant, and these are plants of the montane subalpine shrub, as it's called, subalpine scrub. So scrubby little native plants. And there's an important one called kukanene, which means literally poop of the nene. And so the nene feed on the berries of this plant, and it colors their poop a dark color like this. This is the 2006 group in the bottom of Haleakala crater. They're all pale and smiling, but they don't realize that the vans that we drove up there in are way up here, and they have to walk out of the crater. And it's a challenging climb. We climb about 1,400 feet in the last mile of a 12-mile hike, maybe about the last 2 miles of a 12-mile hike. And so it is a challenging climb, not the steepest one I've ever done, but a challenging climb just the same. After a hike like that, we need to take them back to the beach. And so we take them to what's called Kahikili Beach Park, which is on the west side of West Maui, also called the Old Airport Beach. This is another place where there's the beach, and then immediately when you get away from the beach, there's a coral reef. And so there's a lot of diversity of both fish and marine invertebrates. But again, a trip to the beach in a course called Natural History of the Hawaiian Islands is also a lesson in natural history. This is an indigenous plant called Napaka Kahakai, which means the beach Napaka. There's also a mountain Napaka that we'll come to directly. Then there's also what's called beach morning glory or pohui hui. And the students again see all of these things repeatedly. The fish diversity is good. There's butterfly fishes. I've seen white-mouthed morays. I've seen the peacock grouper. There are a lot of these long-spined sea urchins. And so it's a great place for snorkeling. It's also a great place for beach going. We typically out of Lahaina do a whale watching tour because the humpback whales, which are a migratory big marine mammal, are there in the wintertime. They begin to arrive about December, and most of them are gone again by about March. And so they do about a 3,000 mile round trip from Alaska in the summer to Hawaii in the wintertime. And the pregnant females come there first, and they give birth and nurse their young, and then do the return trip back to Alaska in the springtime. And you say there's a variety of surface behaviors that you see the whales engaging in. They do blows, they do breaches. This is called peduncle throw. You can't motor right up to the whales in a whale watching tour boat, but if the whales come up to your boat, you can't start your motor and sail away until the whales have gone. In the 2016 course, we experienced what they call a Maui mugging, which means the whales swim right up to your boat and they're sitting there watching you, and you can't leave until the whales go away. Also on Maui, we take the students to a place called Kealia Pond National Wildlife Refuge. This is kind of an odd national wildlife refuge because it's right in the middle of several developed areas on Maui, but it's about a 700-acre unit that is a lowland coastal marsh area. And the actual Kealia Pond varies in size on a seasonal basis. In the wintertime, which is the rainy season, it gets larger and deeper. In the summertime, the dry season, it gets smaller and shallower. But this is a place to see 2 of the 3 endemic and endangered subspecies of Hawaiian birds, the Hawaiian coot and the Hawaiian blackneck stilt. Again, these are both endangered subspecies. It's also a good place to see the black-crowned night heron, which is not an endangered species, and it's not an endemic subspecies. Our third island is Kauai. Kauai is a tall enough island that it also has a windward side and a leeward side, meaning that the trade winds blowing from northeast make the northeast side of the island wet and the southwest side of the island dry. The students really like Kauai because we stay at a place called the Kahalani Resort, which is right on the coast, beautiful resort area. This is not a place where you swim in the ocean in the wintertime because the wave action is just too extreme. There are parts of Kauai they really like. There are other parts they like less. This is what's called the Napali Coast. There's a trail that goes out the Napali Coast, which we walk with the students to show them both endemic and indigenous plant species. And we get to a place called Hanakapiai Beach. And in the wintertime, there's actually not a beach there because the wave action washes the sand away. But it's a notorious place. In fact, I think it was the 2016 course, just about 2 weeks before we went there, this is what Hanakapiai Beach looks like in the summertime. When we went there about 2 weeks earlier, a tourist had gone out into the ocean on a boogie board and got overtired, and before the native Hawaiians with surfboards who were strong swimmers could get out to her, she slipped off the boogie board and drowned. And so my students often refer to conditions on this trail as partly cloudy with a slight chance of death. But one of the reasons for going there is to go to Hanakapiai Falls. This is Hanakapiai Falls. It's about a 400-foot waterfall, and the students enjoy swimming in the pool below the waterfall. Another place that we take the students on Kauai is called Poipu Beach Park. Poipu is a really pretty touristy place. The snorkeling is okay. It's not spectacular, but it's reasonably good. But the reason for going to Poipu Beach Park, in addition to students just want to go to the beach, you can almost always count on seeing the Hawaiian monk seal there. The Hawaiian monk seals come out and bask on the sand. This is another endangered species. And when the monk seals come out, the lifeguards, which are almost always present at Poipu Beach, will set up flags and markers and keep the tourists away from the monk seals. You can take pictures of them from a safe distance. This is the one called, that the Hawaiian name is Ilioholo Ika Ua Ua, which means basically equivalent to a dog running through the rough water. We also take them uphill to Waimea Canyon. There's a place near Waimea Canyon. This is the Grand Canyon of the Pacific. There's a place near Waimea Canyon where you can find the third member of the Silver Sword Alliance. This is a plant called Iliao, and basically it's a silver sword on a stick that sticks up out of the ground. And so you can see it in this image, there's a stem that grows up. I can't get my cursor to go there. There's a stem that grows up, then there's a rosette of leaves. And then after the plant's grown for a number of years, the rosette of leaves will produce a flowering stalk. And you can see here that it has these sunflower equivalent kinds of flowers. Iliao is restricted to just a few areas on the dry side of Kauai. And because there are feral goats, you have to be in a place where it's fenced to find Iliao. We take them hiking up into the Kalalau Valley area. This is the end of the Kalalau Trail that goes along the Nepali coast area. And here you're standing at about 4,000 feet and the ocean is right down below you about 2 miles away. So it's a very steep valley. You look the other way, this is toward the ocean. You look the other way, this is upland Kauai, which is a bastion of Hawaiian native rainforest and bird life. One of the wettest places on the planet, Mount Waialealea, which is out in the distance there, gets about 450 inches of rainfall a year. This is a trail I tell my students, it's steep, it's rocky, it's muddy in places, and they don't ever seem to understand what those 3 words mean in the same sentence. And so this is a trail they really don't enjoy walking on. Eventually, you do get out to what's called the Alakai Swamp, where there's a boardwalk. Otherwise, you wouldn't really be able to walk out there. There's a boardwalk that goes out through the native, and in this case, it's a native rainforest, but the rainfall is so heavy that the soil is leached of nutrients. And so the Ohia Lehua canopy is about 1 meter tall. There's a relative of Olapa here called Lapalapa. There's a lot of lobelioids. And this is also a place where you see the mountain Napaka Kuahiwi, along with a lot of other native plants. This is one of the rewards for walking out that it's a 4-mile one-way trail out to this place called the Kilohana Overlook. And you can see this little circular bay right down in the distance. That's Honolei Bay, which is on the north side of Kauai. And of the times that I've been there, it mostly looks like this, where the students, in this case, they're very proud of themselves. This is the 2016 group. They hiked out, they got a great view of Kilohana Overlook. And when we get to the boardwalk across the Alakai Swamp, this is a place I tell them, we need to go as fast as we can safely across the boardwalk, but only 1 roue on the boards at the same time. Many times it looks like this, but in spite of the fog and the rain, it's also a good place for birding. You find one of the other common forest birds called elepaio. You can often hear them rather than see them. They're called elepaio because that's their call. They say elepaio, elepaio, elepaio. And then there's one called anianiao. Again, and these are in addition to Iivi, Apapani, and Amakihi, which are also common in the Alakai Swamp. Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuge on the very far north part of Kauai is a great place for seabirds. You can see both the white-tailed and the red-tailed tropic bird there. The cliffs are basically covered with red-footed boobies. And at certain times of the year, you can also see the Laysan albatross, and you can see the great frigate bird. So a great place for seabirds. You have to be there on the right day at the right time because the National Wildlife Refuge is only open from like 10 to 4 on Monday through Thursday. Our final island is Oahu, and we're getting close to the end here, both in terms of slides and in terms of time. Most people, when they think of Oahu, think of Waikiki, which is the place where we typically would go with the students. On our most recent trip to Oahu, we stayed in a little community called Kailua, which is across the mountains on the north side of Oahu away from Waikiki. And that was a fortunate thing to do because there are a couple of places that we found there that we didn't know about, but that had interesting aspects of natural history. One of those being what's called Lanikai Beach. There's the town of Kailua, and then there's Kailua Beach. And then just to the east of Kailua Beach is Lanikai Beach. This is another place where there's a great beach and you get off the beach into the ocean and there's a beautiful coral reef. And so a lot of fish diversity here as well. Butterfly fishes. This is the saddleback and the teardrop. And one that I had never seen before, I saw it at this place, called the oval butterfly fish. And then there's the Hawaiian domino damselfish in schools above the coral reef heads. So yellow tangs, sailfin tangs, lavender tangs. This is the striped surgeon fish. Another one that I hadn't seen before that gave me pause when I saw it was the white-tipped reef shark. So I was swimming out there and I looked down and I saw the tails. I thought, okay, I know what that is. Swim a little farther out where I could see both of the sharks. They're about 1 meter in body length. And I then turned around gingerly and went back the way I came to get away from the sharks. When I read in my fish guide about the white-tipped reef shark, the guide said they forage at night, they rest on the bottom during the day, which is what they were doing when I saw them, but they are not harmless and should not be trifled with. And so I did not trifle with the white-tipped reef sharks. Field biologists often find things by accident, by good luck. And that was how I found this place called Hamakua Marsh, which is right in the town of Kailua. But the reason I found it was because Becky had gone in for a yoga class. So I went back to pick her up at the place where the yoga class was. And I look in the parking lot of the place. This is what Hamakua Marsh looks like. But I look in the parking lot and there's a Hawaiian gallinule right in the parking lot. And I'd never seen one before, but I thought I know exactly what that is because I'd seen them in the field guide. This is one of 2 places in Hawaii where the endangered endemic subspecies of Hawaiian gallinule is found. The other place is Honolulu National Park, National Wildlife Refuge on Kauai. But Hamakua Marsh is also a place where you can see the Hawaiian coot and the Hawaiian blackneck stilt and the Hawaiian duck, which I don't have a picture of, the koloa. So also on Oahu, we take the students to some culturally and historically important places, including the Arizona Memorial in Pearl Harbor. This is a solemn and moving experience that I recommend for anybody who has the opportunity to go to Oahu. Everybody knows what happened at Pearl Harbor. We take them up Diamond Head because that's a tradition. If you're on Oahu, they get a great view of downtown Honolulu and Waikiki. The climb up Diamond Head is often a real challenge because it's so crowded. Everybody goes there. So this is the 2006 group. We take them to the North Shore where the big surf occurs. And before you know it, we're back at Honolulu International Airport and the course is over. And so I want to say mahalo nui loa to everybody for your attention this morning. And I want to recognize and also say mahalo nui loa to my wife. I took her on a 12-mile hike across a dormant volcano for her 50th birthday. This is Becky on Haleakala. And at that point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and entertain any questions that people might have.
So feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions.
Folks, go ahead.
Wayne, did you have a question? I saw you unmuted.
No.
I'm reading in the chat from Stephen Goldsmith. And so, yes, pleasure to meet you as well.
Okay, if nobody has any questions for Steve, we can go ahead and stop this, and it's being recorded, so it will be posted out on the Friends of Hagerman website. Very interesting program, Stephen. I certainly learned a lot, and I was also on iNaturalist putting in some of the names of the special plants and animals that you'd found, and could see kind of where they were being observed out there on the island. So
yeah, one of the points that I should have made is that the course really focuses on endemic and indigenous plants and animals, but there are lots and lots of exotics as well, both plants and birds. And most people who visit Hawaii don't really make the effort to go see the endemic and indigenous plants and animals, which if you just stay at the resorts in lowland Hawaii, you're not going to see any of the endemic species.
well, thanks again, Steve. And
You're welcome.
nobody's got any questions, I'll go ahead and close out the meeting today.
All right. Thank you all.